Back when I was in high school, there was something that I really, really wanted. It was a an iPod Touch, and all my friends, they talked about how they all have this iPod Touch. For me, I had what was called an iPod Classic, where it had just a bunch of songs that I could listen to, maybe some games. But they said, Tim, you are missing out. You need an iPod Touch. So, in a way, an iPod Touch is think of a smartphone, but I can't make any calls. And so, and this was the time where my the transition between, as we call, dumb phones and smartphones was starting to take off. But well, my family, we just couldn't afford a smartphone, so my sisters and I, we all had the dumb phones. But I thought, you know what? What if I at least had a iPod Touch? So I can at least be somewhat trendy in a way that I can have something that's fun, that's cool and everything. And I talked to my parents, be like, "Hey, can you get this for me? Maybe it's like a gift or something for like birthday or Christmas." And they said, "Tim, that it's way too expensive. See, it costs $300, and that was before taxes and everything. And then so like with tax, it might be closer to like 320, 340, something like that. And then you got to buy the case and the earbuds with it. And so it's probably about $350 or more." And they said, "Tim, that's just way too expensive for us." And they just looked at me and said, "Tim, if you really want to get it, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but you're going to have to get it yourself." So I said, "Okay, I'll do it." And so then I tried to figure out, okay, well, what can I do to make this type of money? What can I do to make up this $300 or more so I can buy this iPod Touch? And well, with the last previous summers, I mowed lawns for a few neighbors, and I said, "Hey, you know what? What if I upped my business a little bit, quote unquote business?" It's and what if I mowed some more lawns for the people in my neighborhood? And so I made some flyers and I handed them out to my neighbors. And I was like, "Yeah, if you want your lawn mowed, just give me a call and I'll be right over." And I wasn't exactly mowing 30 lawns a week, but I was getting about maybe two or three lawns. And so I was like, okay. And I got typically $20 per lawn. And I was like, that works. Okay. I getting some cash flow and getting some traction here. And so then with all that money, I said, okay, I'm going to put this to the side, put a little bit to the side so then I can buy my iPod Touch. And it took a couple of months, but eventually I saved up enough to buy the iPod Touch. It was tough, it was difficult, and even though I was putting just a little bit to the side, I was able to turn just a little bit of money to something bigger. And so something small became something big. And today we're actually going to be talking about how that's so small turned into something big and something that's far more important than a iPod Touch. We're continuing in our series with the parables of Jesus with the parable of the mustard seed. This parable is found here in Matthew chapter 13, but something unique. We also see this in the other gospels as well, Mark chapter 4, as well as Luke 13. And we see that parable come up multiple times, but for us today, we're just going to be looking at Matthew chapter 13. And what's unique in Matthew 13 is that we see multiple parables in this particular chapter, and all of them are mostly focused on the kingdom of God. That's the main focus here in this chapter. But something that we also see, particularly closer to the beginning of this chapter, starting in chapter 10, Jesus, he actually explains why he speaks in parables. These little stories that Jesus shares, he explains why he does this, why he teaches with parables. In fact, that's going to be our first point here, answering the question, why did Jesus teach in parables? And so we see this starting in chapter 13, verse 10, and I invite you to turn there with me this morning. So again, Matthew chapter 13, starting in verse 10, it says, the disciples came to him and asked, why do you speak to the people in parables? In verse 11, he replied, the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and he will have an audience. Whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. Verse 13, this is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You'll be ever hearing, but never understanding. You'll be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's hearts have become consoled. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. So in this, we see that Jesus, he's talking to his disciples. His disciples are asking the question, why do you speak in parables? Why are you doing this? What's the reason for this? And ultimately, it comes down to two simple things. There's two things that we see this. Number one is so that these parables, they reveal truth to people who have ears to hear, to allow people to understand, the people who want to know more about Jesus, know more about his teachings. It's to help people understand what Jesus is talking about. See, Jesus, he understands that not everyone is a theologian. He knows that maybe some people might have trouble of understanding of what his teachings are. And so he explains it with a parable. So it's easier to understand with like a little illustration to explain his teaching. He's revealing these truths that were previously secret, these mysteries that were unknown. He's revealing them to him, revealing these secrets to the people. First, he's revealing them to the disciples, because they've been given to them the secrets of the kingdom of this. I'm sorry, excuse me. The knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven have been given to the disciples, but not to other people. So Jesus, he's teaching these parables to people and giving more secrets to the disciples, so then they can take them and understand them and teach it to other people. So then they may too be understand, because other people, they have ears to hear. So that was the first reason why Jesus spoke in parables. The second reason was they conceal truth from people who will not listen. They conceal truth from people who will not listen. See, with these parables, with these teachings, Jesus was doing this type of strategy. He was teaching in a different way than the Pharisees. See, the Pharisees, these experts, the teachers of the law, they wouldn't do parables. In fact, they would just teach in a way that's kind of meant for like high level education people. And they're just like, well, you have to understand it. You have to understand it at our level. So the Pharisees, they're saying, since I'm such great and powerful and holy, you have to understand it at my level. I can't make it easier for you. And so the Pharisees, they It made it harder for people to understand. But with the parables, it made the Pharisees a little upset. In fact, we've seen a couple of these parables throughout the series where the Pharisees would become upset. They would become insulted. And they didn't like this. And because of this, they then just rejected Jesus. They did not want to hear what Jesus had to say. They pushed him away. They rejected him. They rejected the Messiah, the one that was promised. The disciples, they were blessed because they saw what the Pharisees could not see. But on top of that, the disciples were able to see what the prophets wanted to see. I want you to think about that. The disciples, they were blessed because they saw what the Pharisees could not see. But then they were also blessed because they got to see what the prophets wished to see. Because in this little section here, this verses 14 through 15, Jesus is actually quoting the book of Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 6, to be more precise, and talking about how people's hearts, they're going to be hardened, how they will reject the teachings. And this was during the time before the exile. I don't know if you remember the exile. Last year we talked about in the book of Daniel how there was a bunch of people, the Babylonians, they came in, they attacked King Nebuchadnezzar. He came in and attacked Jerusalem, and they had to surrender, and Babylon then took Daniel and his friends to Babylon, the 70 years of exile. And so this was before all that. Their hearts were hardened. And then we also saw with Nehemiah how everyone was coming back after that 70 years and everything. So people thought like, oh, it was just talking about that time. The hearts of being hardened, that was only a partial fulfillment. But this right here with Jesus, this is the 100% fulfillment. He's fulfilling what the prophets had prophesied. The Messiah had come. But people's hearts were hardened because they did not want to hear what Jesus had to say. Now, there were a few teachers of the law, such as Nicodemus or Joseph of Arimathea. They were known as Jesus' secret disciples, but they were still Pharisees, the experts in the law, but they wanted to know more about Jesus. They actually listened to Jesus. They had ears to hear. They wanted to know more about the truth, know more about the secrets of the kingdom of heaven. And so that explains a little bit on why Jesus spoke in parables. And I hope this helps you as we've been going through this series, as well as the last few messages in this series as we look the next few weeks here. But coming back to what our parable is today, we're going to be looking at just one of the many parables that are found here in Matthew 13, the parable of the mustard seed, which we find in verses 31 through 32, where Jesus tells a story. That's our second point here today. Jesus tells a story. So starting in verse 31, he says, he told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all your seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and perch in its branches. So a mustard seed. How small is a mustard seed? Now, we can probably take a little bit of understanding that seeds are very small. But when we look at a mustard seed, it's very small. In fact, it's not just something that you can get in the Middle East. You can get it right here at Walmart. In fact, in here I've got some mustard seeds, which thanks to Marjorie, she got this last night for this message. And these seeds, these little mustard seeds, they're very small, probably a millimeter, maybe two at the most. These are very small seeds. In fact, it even says, what was it? Heaven is like a mustard seed, which, though it is the smallest of your seeds. So this was probably the smallest known seed in the world at the time. Like the known world was very small at the time, probably just the Mediterranean, but with this seed, it's a very small, tiny seed. And after the service, if you want to have a closer look at these, you may do so and just to have a closer look at these seeds. So Jesus is saying that the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, so small. And a man took it and planted it in his field, and it grew, and it became the largest of all garden plants. Now it's kind of interesting because during this time period, when someone were to say something is like a mustard seed, it's kind of saying it's almost like an insult, or it's just kind of like just an emphasis. It's so small, it's not even worth our time. Kind of like, that hole in the roof, so small, it's the size of a mustard seed. It's not that big of a deal. Or it's like insulting like a child or something. They're so small, they're like a mustard seed. They're so small and tiny. But then Jesus comes in and uses that the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. Even though it's the smallest of all garden seeds, it grows, becomes the biggest of all garden plants. And it's not the biggest plant in all of the garden or all of the world. There are obviously plants that are much bigger, but just one of these seeds can grow into something that's 10 to 12 feet tall. That's a big plant. That's a big garden plant. That's what Jesus is talking about here today. In fact, in other chapters, we see that Jesus talks about how you can have faith as small as a mustard seed can move mountains. Faith as small as a mustard seed can move mountains. And with this, Jesus is trying to explain with the kingdom of heaven, even though it's so small, it can grow into something bigger. Now with the Pharisees, like for them to think like, wait a second, the kingdom of heaven, it's big, it's ginormous, isn't it? It's supposed to be big. Why is Jesus then saying it's like a little teeny tiny seed? It's small. But Jesus is trying to explain, even though it's small, it can grow into something bigger, something much more important. It might be small now, but it can grow into something much, much bigger. In fact, we even see this with the disciples. See, for the disciples, they were only small at the time of when they decided to go out and share the gospel. It was just a few of them. Only 12. And what did the disciples do after Jesus told them to go and make disciples of all nations? The word spread throughout the world. Friends, I want you to think about this. A man from 2,000 years ago impacted just a few men, fisherman, a tax collector, a zealot, and a few other low-ended people, and inspired them to go and share the message that Jesus Christ is Lord and that our sins are forgiven. That happened 2,000 years ago. And today, we are on the opposite side of the world of where all that took place. Think about that. We're here in the Chicagoland area, the United States, talking about a man who lived 2,000 years ago over in Israel. In fact, we're not just talking about him. We have this building dedicated to following him, to serving him. I mean, talk about something so small grew into something big. Even talks about having faith as small as a mustard seed can move mountains. Jesus talks about how just in other chapters, in other gospels, we see Jesus talks about how we can have faith as small as a mustard seed can move mountains. What do you think about that? Faith the size of this seed, just one of these seeds, not the whole jar, one of these seeds can move mountains. I think those disciples moved mountains, don't you think? Now, Jesus was not talking about when moving mountains. He's not talking about able to actually move Mount Everest. But he's talking about the impact that we can have on the kingdom of heaven. Now, what does it mean to have true faith compared to false faith? Which that goes into our third and final points this morning. True faith versus false faith. You see, when people think about like, oh, you just gotta have faith. Gotta have faith in God. It's like, okay, I'm gonna trust him that he's gonna give me $1 million, erase all my debt, get rid of all the problems and worries I have in the world, and he's gonna do it for me right now. And if he doesn't give it to me right now, well, then he doesn't exist. See, that's not real faith. People try to test God and be like, okay, show me that you're really you. See, that's not really faith. That's just, I want to get what I want. See, with true faith, we see there's a desire to do the Lord's will, a desire to do the will of the Father. That's true faith. Because it's not what I want, it's what God wants. In fact, it's even looking to not even gain any credit, to not look to gain anything. That's true faith. But on top of that, it's accepting God's answer. Which I know sometimes God's answer is not what we want. Because there's 4 ways God answers to us. 4 ways God answers our prayers. It's yes, no, wait, the best is yet to come. See, that last one, the best is yet to come. It's a combination of all 3. See, yes, it's like God gives us what we prayed for. No, God doesn't give us what we prayed for. Maybe wait, it's kind of, well, we got to wait for a yes or no, but then the best is yet to come. It's a combination of all the others. You're not going to get what you prayed for, but it'll be better than what you prayed for, but you're just going to have to wait a little bit for it. See, it's accepting God's answer. It's still trusting in God. See, I like to use the example of when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. And we saw this earlier this year in Matthew chapter 26, where on the night that he was betrayed, he and his disciples went to the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus prayed, Lord, if it's possible, take this cup from me. But yet not my will, but your will be done. See, Jesus, he was less than 24 hours to be nailed to the cross. And Jesus knew what was ahead of him. He was going to be beaten, mocked, flogged, have a crown of thorns pushed into his head, have to carry his cross, and then get nailed to the cross. And so he just prayed to the Lord, if it's possible, take this cup from me. But he said, not my will be done, but your will be done. And he accepted God's answer, and he did God's will. See, that's true faith. I'd like to use that as true faith as the example. He accepting God's answer. But then when we take a look at false faith, it's the opposite, where true faith, again, it's desiring the will of the Father. False faith is not desiring the will of the Father. True faith is not looking to gain something. False faith is only looking to gain something. True faith is accepting God's answer. False faith is rejecting God's answer. The drive for false faith is making myself wealthy, rich. Might not be currency like money, but I got to gain something. When one gets the answer, they say, Lord, I don't like that answer, so I'm not going to trust you anymore. Friends, there's a lot of prayers that God has said no to me, a lot. And that's still an answered prayer. I might not like it, I might not want it, but I still got to trust in Him. And I'm telling you, in the moment, I didn't like it, but I'm very happy God has said no to a lot of things in the past. And you see, with false faith, it's kind of like transactional. It's kind of like, well, God, if you give me what I want, then I'll love you. I'll worship you as long as I give what I want. The problem is, true faith is not transactional. It's not a give and take. It's not a God, if I scratch your back, you scratch my back type of thing. It's Lord, I trust you no matter what the outcome is. It's not a transactional type of faith. That's what true faith is. True faith is not desiring your own will. It's the will of the Father's and the Father's alone, and accepting His answer. As we take a look at our application here today, there's three things to take home with us. The first one is Jesus wants us to understand the glory of His kingdom. Jesus wants us to understand the glory of His kingdom. And that's why He spoke in parables. He made it easy for people to understand the kingdom of heaven. See, He didn't talk all fancy. He didn't look fancy. He didn't come from a rich family or a rich neighborhood. He came from poverty, and He just wanted people to understand. And He spoke in a way that was different than the Pharisees, from the experts in the law, the ones who rejected him, the Messiah. All he wanted to do was tell people about the kingdom of heaven. He just wanted to teach people how they can understand it too. That you don't have to be a fancy theologian to understand the kingdom of heaven. He just wanted them to understand that Jesus Christ had come, that he had come to save them from their sins. The second thing is when Jesus is at the center, small things can become big. When Christ is at the center, something small can become something big, just like these mustard seeds. If Christ is in the center, it can be, you might have something small, very tiny mustard seed, but they can grow to something much bigger, something much more profound, more important. That's what Jesus wanted us to understand, how something so small can become something big. If done properly, can become something big. If Jesus is at the center, just like with the disciples. Even though it was just 12 that originally were selected by Jesus, the disciples, they took what Jesus said. Well, obviously not Judas, but they took what he said and shared it with the world. They saw what they saw and they wanted to tell people about it. And 2,000 years later, we're talking about Jesus Christ. 12 men changed the world. And then finally, true faith can move mountains. True faith can move mountains, friends. See, when it comes to true faith, you can make a change in the world. Now, obviously, not talking about able to physically move Mount Everest, but it's talking about the, the impact that one can have for the kingdom of heaven. A giant impact on the kingdom of heaven. And that's what true faith can do, friends. So, friends, as we leave today, as we close today, may we leave with true faith. Let us pray.